All right, everybody, it's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show, brought to you by the Skeptic Society and Skeptic Magazine. Hey, the new issue's out, just came out this week on culture wars. Check out that culture war looking cover. You can get your issues at skeptic.com/magazine. We can send you the hard copy here. You can get it digitally. And if you want to give the podcast and the society a little love, we are a 501c3 nonprofit science, research, and education organization at skeptic.com/donate. All right, my guest is returning champion, John Mackey. He's an entrepreneur and co-founder and visionary of Whole Foods Market. Here's the new book. It's his memoir, The Whole Story, Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism. I just finished it yesterday, John. It's a great book. Incredible that your life is just amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You know, John, you're my age. Well, you were born a year ahead of me, so you're my wise senior, I guess.
Treat me with respect.
That's right. I'm always curious about the big picture, as you know, how lives turn out, genes, environment, and luck, but also timing. So I got to thinking when I was reading your book, that little quip about had Bill Gates been born 10 years earlier, 10 years later, he wouldn't have been, the timing would have been wrong for him. He wouldn't have been there to develop the software. Or had the Google boys been born 10 years earlier, 10 years later, they would have missed the window for search engines and so on. If you would have been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, do you feel like you would have missed the opportunity for that, kind of Whole Foods, organic, natural foods market that came online about the good timing with you?
Probably. I mean, we're all products of our environment and the culture that we're in, and the influences that are around us, and so we pick up on the cultural milieu that we're part of, and it affects us. So I think there's no way to test the hypothesis, but
Yeah.
it's probably true. That's probably who knows. I think it's a series of coincidences that set me on the path to create Whole Foods Market. It wasn't something I dreamed about when I was a little boy. So, yeah, I think that's probably what you said is true.
But I guess I suspect you'd be successful at almost anything, but you're uber successful because maybe it's also not just timing, but timing for what you do especially well, because this is your lifestyle. You live this lifestyle of eating this way.
Yeah, but it's my lifestyle. But if I'd been born in a different time, maybe it wouldn't have been my lifestyle. It's just, it's the universe is obviously infinitely complex, and there's so many different factors that go into it. So it's interesting speculation, but it's not a hypothesis we can easily test.
Well, you speak a lot about your father, the influence of Bill. Give us some examples of how he influenced you.
Well, when I was a little boy, I was very close to my father. My mother was really pretty neurotic, and I sort of instinctively, even as a kid, I sort of pushed my mother away a little bit and clung a little bit more to my father, I think, and I wanted to be like him. Um, so he got me interested in sports because he was so passionate about that. Competition of all kinds, he got me interested in that. And we used to, my dad was an excellent debater, and you had to be able to defend your point of view at the dinner table, or there's no point in talking if you couldn't back up what you were saying. So I learned to debate, you might say, at an early age. And I think I talk about at one point in the book when my dad died and I was at the memorial service, and I went into this altered state of consciousness where I felt like every eulogy everybody was saying, where they were talking about me, because my father was so much like me in so many ways, or I was so much like him, that it could have been my memorial service. It was a very eerie feeling to be a guest at your own memorial service. So I think our parents do influence us. They give us both gifts and problems.
Yeah, of course, all of us look at the environmental gifts and problems that our parents give us, but there's also genetics. Half of the variance between people is heritable.
It is.
Yeah.
For example, I have done, with Love Life, I've gone through all of this various different kind of testing, including a deep genetic testing. And so I have the my dad had Alzheimer's disease, and I have one of the four markers for it, but the worst marker for it, which is APOE4 gene, which also connects with heart disease, high cholesterol, stroke, things like that. So not maybe not the best gene to have if you could root that one out.
That's
But
the one you have.
yeah, it's one I have. Mhm.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. Well, so then your chosen lifestyle, the way you eat and work out, is
I,
perfect for that then.
my lifestyle and my diet are the best ways to probably resist those diseases.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think I did the 23andMe, and at the time there was two markers, not four. I didn't know they had four now.
I have
But
four
even
now.
that, there's still a lot of variance there. You could have all four markers and not get Alzheimer's.
That's right. I mean, it again, genetics loads the gun, but your lifestyle fires the gun.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like genes can only account for so much. What about personality and temperament? I mean, I know you pretty well. You are at one time very thoughtful, polite, a nice guy, but you're also uber competitive. Did you get some of that from your dad?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that earlier. I got my competitive drive from my father. And I think part of it was he himself was very competitive. We used to play a lot of games. We played cards, we played ping pong, we played board games, and you know, a lot of parents let their kids win to try to build up their self-esteem. My father never let his kids win anything, and so if I ever beat my dad in anything, I it was an amazing accomplishment. And I remember the first time I beat him in ping pong, I was probably about I don't know, 11 or 12 years old. And I wasn't sure he didn't. I asked him, "Did you let me win that game?" He said, "Hell no, I've never let you win anything. Congratulations."
See, again, very different from the everybody gets a trophy parenting today.
No, my parents didn't give, they, they didn't, for example, one of the things about entrepreneurs, if you go back, is that entrepreneurs most of them start working at a young age. My parents really never gave us an allowance. They basically they were a bunch of chores, and every chore had a price on it. So um, if I wanted money, I would do chores, and so I learned to work for money at an early age. And as soon as I could get a job, at the when I was old enough to get a job, I got a job immediately because I wanted to earn money so I could spend that money on things I was interested in. So I actually feel like that was a good thing. I think giving kids a lot of free stuff is probably not the best thing for their long term work ethic.
Yeah, no, no kidding. For obvious reasons. Okay, what about early childhood influences, teachers or mentors outside of the home, or some of your peer groups or friends that influenced you?
I mean, everything influences us, Michael. I'm not sure where you're going in this in your line of
Well,
thinking
I'm
here.
just kind of picking apart your particular narrative and what it can tell us about, the bigger picture of how lives turn out.
I mean, yeah, sure. Certain teachers influence me. I mean, I talk about in the book how a particular philosophy professor that I sort of idolized, Robert C. Solomon, who was an existentialist, a brilliant philosopher, right, who wrote 30 or 40 books, had a big impact on me when I was in my late teens and early 20s. And even later on, he wrote the book that had the biggest influence on me from a business ethics standpoint, Ethics and Excellence, which is the best business ethics books I ever read. And that's when I first got introduced to stakeholder thinking. And that had a huge impact on me as well. So I think I think books have had a big impact on me intellectually. And then I've always been willing to change my mind when I felt like the evidence or the facts supported a different point of view. I never was too attached to a way of thinking. I never identified myself with my belief system. Most people do, and therefore they get very defensive when they feel like if you're attacking their ideas, they feel like they're being personally attacked. I don't ever feel that way. It's like, hey, if my ideas are wrong, I'll just change my mind. What's the problem? I'm not my beliefs. I'm not my ideas. That's not who I am.
Yeah, that would be better if more people had that attitude. You became a born again Christian, and then you abandoned that, but your parents weren't particularly religious, right? So
No,
where
I
did that
was.
come from?
I think that came from. It happened after my senior year in high school, before the summer before I went to college, and I think. when I think back about it, it's like that's an uncertain time. At least it was for me. I'm 18 years old, 17 or 18 years old, and I'm leaving home. I'm going to college. Self-doubt. Can I do well in college? These are it's going to be a lot smarter people, and uh, what the hell can I even do? And can I ever what kind of job could I do? Wasn't interested in anything but kind of playing sports and reading books. Um, so I didn't really see how I fit into the world, and I didn't have any. And I started asking those metaphysical questions. Uh, why are we here? Is there any meaning to life? Is there any life after death? Is there God exist? Those kind of things. And I'd met a woman, or I kind of got a crush on this woman that got me to convert to Christianity, and that lasted about 2 years. It was good while it lasted, but ultimately, there was the problem. I talk about it in the book, the whole story. The problem of evil was unanswerable, in my opinion, from that particular framework, and so I drifted away from it at that point. Became an atheist and existentialist after that for and really until I got into psychedelics.
Yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute. But yeah, I do think the Odyssey or the problem of evil is an insoluble one. It's short of just saying, well, shit happens. That's just the way it goes. The universe is entropic and things run down and bad things happen. There's nothing behind it. No one's pulling the strings, making good things or bad things happen.
Let me ask you a question. When you dream at night, do bad things sometimes happen?
Yeah,
Are they real?
no.
Well, perhaps that's the answer to the problem of evil. Perhaps this is a dream too, and what's happening that's evil is not actually happening.
John, yeah, but if I get in a car accident and I broke my leg, the leg is really broken.
Bad things happen in dreams sometimes, but they're ultimately, you wake up, and when you wake up, you see, oh, thank God that wasn't just a dream.
I see. So maybe someday we'll all wake up into what the real reality is. I think that's how we closed the last podcast episode. You were
We
telling
sort
me
of
not
did, exactly.
not to worry about life after death. It's all going to be fine. I hope you're right. But is that what appeals to you about the existentialist philosophy versus Christianity?
Well, what appealed to me about that is I just thought it was true. So, I was seeking truth, meaning, purpose. Um, the problem of evil was insoluble within the framework of any religious religion that I was aware of at that point. I didn't have as big a picture about world religions then. I've studied world religions since then, and they all have a different answer to it. The Buddha has the best answer, which is it's all just illusion. It's Maya, and so meditate, wake up, wake up,
Yeah.
wake up.
I don't know how far I'd go with you on that, but I do like the existentialist and Stoic attitude that it's your attitude toward things that happen to you, not the things that happened or the people that did them to you or whatever's you think is behind it. It only matters how you respond to
Once you know you're dreaming, you can wake up in the dream and take control of the dream.
it. Well, maybe that's a good time to bring up these influences. You mentioned in the book Ken Wilber's A Theory of Everything, an integral vision for business, politics, science, and spirituality. Ram
Yeah.
Dass's Be Here Now. Speak about some of those influences on you.
I don't think Be Here Now was a huge influence on me. It just came up in the book because he visited my first store, Saferway, and I'd happened to have read it. It didn't have a big influence. Um, I mean, I didn't put I there. I've read thousands and thousands of books, and to a certain extent, they've all had some type of. If they were any good, they had some kind of influence on me. But I wouldn't put Be Here Now as particularly influential on me.
How about the
But
other one?
what was the other one you named?
That was Ken Wilber's A Theory of Everything.
Oh yeah, Ken Wilber. I'd read his earlier stuff in my 20s, but and then I hadn't read anything for a few years, and then a friend gave me A Theory to Everything, and Wilber has a developmental theory of consciousness and of culture, that both cultures and individual consciousness evolves through various stages, and that I think why I liked it and why it had an influence on me at the time was because I could see how my own life had evolved through those stages in sort of a predictable way. I'd gone from a traditionalist with, born again Christianity um, to modernism, a rationalist, an atheist, an existentialist, and then I'd gone into the sort of postmodern mindset, counterculture, and new age religions, social justice, sort of, and then I evolved past that, or I believe I did, to the integral framework, where I saw the beauty of each of those and integrated those together. So I don't fit into any of those tribes. And until I read Wilbur, I didn't really see where I fit. And after that, I thought, well, I get it. This is where I'm at.
Hmm. Interesting. All right. You mentioned reading thousands of books. You went to Trinity and UT Austin. You didn't finish college. Why did you not finish college?
Uh, I'll tell you the story. And so I'm on track. I was going back and forth between Trinity and UT. I went to Trinity 3 times and the University of Texas in Austin 3 times. And I had different things I liked about those schools. Trinity had really small classes, and you could, I love the fact that the professors would have us over for, you know, drinks and we'd talk about philosophy or religion and at night, and I love that kind of intimacy. And then, but UT, I liked Austin better than San Antonio, and I had a I could study religion at Trinity, but UT had a very, very well-renowned philosophy department. So I kind of wanted both. I wanted to study religion and philosophy, so I kind of went back and forth. And one of the turning points in my life, which got edited out of the book, the original book was 500 pages instead of 400 pages. So
Oh, okay.
maybe I'll have to get the director's cut. Um, anyway, I tell a story that didn't make the cut. And when I was about 20 years old, and I'm on track to get a degree in philosophy from the University of Texas. I had most of my prerequisites were done, but there was one required philosophy class that I was taking, and I just hated it. I didn't like the professor. I didn't like the books. I didn't want to read them. And so I'm going through this battle. This is early on in the semester because there was part of my being, in a deeper part of my being, that said, you shouldn't read things you're not interested in. And it's like, well, I know, but I have to read this. I have to buckle down and read this because it's required reading, required course. I need to do that to get my degree. Like we all do that, right? We all take courses we don't like and do the things we don't like to do in order to get to some goal, to get to the end of it. Well, I didn't care about the goal, and I didn't like the means to get to it. So I remember having this intense discussion within my own being, so to speak, for about a week. And then one night I was trying to read the assigned study, the book that was assigned, and I really didn't like the book. And I stood up and I threw the book down on the table. And with some choice language, which I won't repeat here, I said, I'm not going to read this effing book. And then I started thinking through, okay, well, if I'm not reading this book, I might as well drop the class. I'm going to drop the class. So there was a ripple effect, right? I'm not going to read this book, so I'm going to drop the class. If I drop the class, well, I'm not going to get a degree in philosophy at the University of Texas. If I don't do that, or some other place I want to get a degree, no. What do you want to do then? I just want to study things I'm interested in. And so really from that point onward, I never read a book again. If people give me books all the time, I look at them, and if I'm not interested in them, I don't read them. And because there are an infinite number of books that I do want to read, so why waste my time on books I don't want to read? So I then decided I'm not going to get a degree in philosophy. I'm just going to read and study what I want to do. And then the next sort of ripple on that was, in fact, I'm not going to do anything else the rest of my life I don't want to do. And I took control of my life at that point. I took control of my own. And so I used to go, I audited classes. I still took courses. I have 120 hours of electives and a very high grade point average, close to a 4 point. And, but I just stopped trying to get a degree. I audited classes, and I went to the library sometimes all day and bring a lunch, and I'd come back at night. I was very eager to learn everything I could. I just and wherever my curiosity took me. And so um yeah, it was I look back on that time in my life sort of romantically because I was purely in the quest of knowledge and without any other, you know, motivations that were in the way of that.
Do you recommend that to people? Follow your bliss and then the money will follow.
I actually do recommend that. I don't know if the money will follow or not, but
Yeah.
if you follow your bliss, at least you're being true to yourself. I
Yeah.
really do believe that what I believe is Joseph Campbell's the call to the hero's journey. I believe each of us has a call to a hero's journey. That's not the same call, but it's the call to follow our own heart, follow our own destiny. And most people are too scared to answer that. They're scared of being rejected by their parents or upsetting their parents, or they're afraid they're going to fail and they're going to end up being homeless someplace, or that they're just frightened, and so they don't do it. They play it safe. And I didn't. I heard that call. First, it was the pursuit of knowledge, and then it was my spiritual quest and my spiritual journey, and that ended up leading me to do Whole Foods. And I'm still on my hero's journey, and I wrote a book about it. That's what the book's about, my own hero's journey.
It's a great story, John. You are the true autodidact. I love that. Yeah, everybody should do that. Maybe it's not just, a fear or fear of risk taking or being risk averse. Maybe some people just need to be told that. I mean, that's not the kind of thing parents tell you typically, right? They want you to get your degree and get a job because they're worried about your, basics in life, but maybe something like that.
Nobody told me that, Michael. I discovered that later. I hadn't read Joseph Campbell at that time. I wasn't conscious that I was following a hero's journey. I just was following my inner drive, my inner desire. It was something that I felt like I had to do. I wanted to do it. Uh, Later on, when I read Joseph Campbell's work, I thought, well, hell, that's what I've been doing. I've been on my hero's journey. I didn't consciously start it when I was 20 years old to be on a hero's journey. I'd never heard of the term before.
Yeah. Yeah, but that does bring up this bigger subject of, does everyone need to go to college? There seems to be this, impulse that, if my kid doesn't get into Harvard, I didn't raise him right. And just, if you don't have a degree, then you're not worthy. I remember one of the Freedom Fests you and I were at, Charles Murray gave a talk about that. What's wrong with going to trade schools? What's wrong with just doing something else? Why do you have to go to college? College isn't for everybody. And, maybe you're a living example of that because you're plenty smart. You've read thousands of books. You've written books. You're one of the smartest people I know, but you didn't finish college. Maybe you don't need that.
I mean, there's a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm hardly alone in this. Lots of entrepreneurs. Let's look at some of the entrepreneurs that never graduated from college. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Michael Dell. Those are three that pop in my brain right off the top, and that didn't seem to hinder their their
Yeah.
success in life. Generally, entrepreneurs have this drive to create something, and that bug bit me at a pretty young age as well. To create something, to build something, uh, to make your mark. I mean, I had that drive to be sure. And frankly, a lot of entrepreneurs have that, and a lot of them start working at young ages too, like I did. Um, and I they didn't they had they were most entrepreneurs that don't finish college are just too impatient. They want to get started. Michael Dell was he, our interesting thing is because I know Michael. He lives in Austin. He's about 8 or 9 years younger than me, but and we grew up in the same area of Houston. Went to the same high school. We went to University of Texas. He started Dell Computers when he was in his dorm room, like when he was like a sophomore in college, and then he just got into it and he just stopped going to school because he had this business that was growing. And if you know the story of Bill Gates, he was going to Harvard, and but he gets so interested in computers and writing software that he starts this business up. He's just a kid, right? And he looks even younger than his age is, and he starts his Microsoft in some, I think in Phoenix initially, or somewhere in Arizona. And then he just he's too busy on that, so he just stops going to Harvard. Steve Jobs, same similar stories. I mean, these guys are just very driven.
Yeah, Jobs went to Reed College, which is an elite liberal arts college in
Yeah,
Oregon, and dropped out. But here I always worry about the survivorship bias that we're only picking out the winners and going, okay, what did they do? Okay, they went off to an elite college, they dropped out, they moved back to their parents' house, did a startup in their parents' garage with their buddies, and now they're billionaires. And then, or you read like Walter Isaacson's biography of Jobs, and you pick through, okay, what's the secret sauce here? But what about all the people that dropped out of college in the 70s and moved back to their parents' house to start a startup and they went out of business? We don't hear about them.
it's true. I mean, good point. I think there is a survivor bias to any type of reporting like this. And I think those people that we were named, I think they were also on their own hero's journey. There's no there's no guarantees. You can fail. Just because you're on a hero's journey, just because you're driven doesn't mean you're going to necessarily succeed. And you're right. There are plenty more failures than there are successes. Plenty more people that end up homeless or alcoholics or uh, overdosing on heroin that might have thought they were following their hero's journeys. It's hard to say. I can only speak my own truth. I can't speak for everybody else.
But there are studies of entrepreneurs. I think Kahneman reported on this in Thinking Fast and Slow, that they're not just high risk takers, but also have an over optimism bias. They're willing to push through failure after failure after failure, even when the logical thing probably would be to bail and get out and cut your losses before you lose it even more. But they push through even that.
Well, persistence is a virtue that generally pays, and resilience pays. You're going to have you're I think, let me speaking for myself, and I won't try to generalize. You can see if it's valuable for other people as well. But I just always have a faith I can figure it out. I may make mistakes, I may fail, but then I'm going to learn from those mistakes, and I'm going to keep getting better and better and better and better. And then you'll eventually crack the code if you stay with it and you're persistent, um, and you're constantly engaged. Your creativity and your imagination are fully engaged. You generally do find solutions, and you sometimes you bounce up against a wall you can't get through. But in general, in my experience in life, there's still some way to innovate around the blocks. I mean, my story in Whole Food, the whole story is about so many times we had blocks and we were able to innovate around them.
Yeah. Okay. What was the culture like in the 70s of food, markets, and so on, Safer Way, as opposed to what? Safeway. Did you just look around and go, most of the food that these supermarkets are selling is just crap and I'm going to do something about it?
Yes, it's exactly correct. I mean, I wasn't trying to do something about the whole food supply. I was just a kid trying to open up one store, right? But one of the things I try to tell people that are young, because they cannot understand this, people do not realize how bad the food stores were in the United States, 50 or 40, 50 years ago. They were terrible. And they got a lot worse before they got better because once Walmart got into the super centers and they started doing grocery and not just non-food items, that scared all the conventional supermarkets so much they tried to chase Walmart. They tried to cut their cost. They invested less money in their stores. They bought lower quality produce to make it less expensive. And they tried to compete with Walmart on price by and the stores actually got uglier and more sterile. And Whole Foods just never paid attention to that. We're kind of doing our own thing. And that really, Walmart, I would say, was actually one of the keys to our success because they terrified the conventional supermarket so much with their supercenters that instead of going sort of upmarket, which is what we did, sell the highest quality and the best foods we can and in beautiful environments, better service with higher prices, they tried to fight with Walmart because Walmart was systematically going into their markets and they were getting destroyed. It wasn't until later when Whole Foods became incredibly successful. We had become some point in the around 2013, 2012, 2013, our market capitalization became the highest in the entire food retailing market except for Walmart. And so we were worth more than Kroger or any, Albertson, Safeway, any of the Publix, any of those big chains. And when our market cap passed Kroger's up, they had 10 times our sales. And so I think that's when the supermarkets woke up. It's like, hell, it'd be a lot easier to compete with Whole Foods than Walmart. Let's start copying them and undercutting them in price. That's exactly what happened.
We had a crappy supermarket a couple blocks away from your Whole Foods here in Santa Barbara on State Street, and they tore it down. Somebody else bought it. I don't know who. It tore it down. Now it's a Bristol Farms, and they're kind of trying to do what you guys are doing at Whole Foods.
Well, Bristol Farms has been around a long time. We first started competing them in Los Angeles a long time ago, and the, whereas Whole Foods went sort of the natural organic food route, Bristol was really appealing to the foodies, more of a European type of market.
Hmm.
Uh,
What's the difference?
and um, food as health versus food as pleasure is the best intellectual distinction I could make. Whole Foods ultimately tried to be both, and and Bristol Farms, though, when they got going, they were real. And there's a strong market to people that are just interested in food. They don't care if it's healthy or not. They just want the pleasure of it. They want the finest tasting wines, the best olive oil, the best cheese, the best bread in terms of taste. So the natural foods movement was really about, well, what's going to be the healthiest food? And hopefully that'll taste good too. But if it doesn't, it's still the healthiest. So,
But you should. Wouldn't you strive for both?
well, I did. I
Yeah.
talk about that in the book. If you there's a part where I talk about as Whole Foods started out from that healthy perspective, but as we acquired some other businesses, particularly Wellspring back in 1991, and their founder, CEO Lex Alexander, was a foodie par excellence. So he was a somewhat Epicurean genius. So he kind of woke us up collectively to this market that we were kind of missing out on. So then we kind of tried to do both. And there was always a tension and a conflict between those who wanted our stores to be a little more puritanical and those who wanted us to loosen it up. Um, and I had to make sure we were doing both as the
Nice.
CEO.
Okay, so you cobbled together a few tens of thousands of dollars from here and there, including your parents, to start your first store. I guess to a 20-year-old listening to this would think, yeah, okay, I can do that. But then how do you take the next step? How do you go to investors or banks or like, I want to open a superstore or I want to open 10 stores? That seems to be a harder step to make.
Uh, it is a harder step to make. So you better be a good entrepreneur. I make a joke in the book about when I was a born again Christian, I was very good at converting people to
That's right.
Christianity.
I love that. You put the same skills to work later.
Yes, exactly. So you have to be good at sales. And I was good at it because I really believed in what I was selling and I had a lot of passion about it. And and I could persuade people to take a risk on us. And so I think that's one of the secrets. But the other thing is if you're making money and we made money early on, it's an easier sell because it's like you should invest in our business. We're growing and we're making money and we're going to make more money, and so the risk is lower for you. That's not in fashion today as much. Now you have a huge venture capital business that really always is talking about we'll make our profits later. Let's just scale our sales, and so they're trying to scale, and that can be sometimes not good advice for an entrepreneur. As you can see in the book, I'm not a big fan of a lot of the venture capitalists that are I call them hitchhikers with credit cards. As long as you
That's funny.
as long as you help them pay for as long as you get them to where they want to get to, they'll help pay for the gas. However, if you wander off the path that you told that you were going to go down, they may try to hijack the car, hire a new driver, probably with an MBA from Harvard or Wharton or Stanford, and throw you out on the side of the road.
What about meat? You're a vegan, but you sell meat at Whole Foods, and so how do you square that?
Well, I wasn't a vegan back then.
Oh,
Uh, I've been a vegan for 21 years. However, I was a vegetarian back then. And the first store, Saferway, was a vegetarian store. I kind of make a joke about Saferway. Saferway was very, very pure. Renee and I were so idealistic. We were so young. It was a vegetarian, and we didn't sell sugar. We didn't sell alcohol. We didn't sell caffeine. We did almost no business. safer way really struggled to bring in customers. And so when we decided to relocate, we merged with another local store that we were friendly with, Clarksville Natural Grocery. And we decided, you know what, we're going to sell meat and seafood and beer and wine. We're going to be a real grocery store that's going to cater to this particular niche of sort of natural food enthusiasts, hippies. But we would have the best produce, and we get it organic whenever we could, and natural meats, no artificial ingredients, flavorings, colorings, and preservatives. So that's where we do our quality standards. That particular combination, I always say, you have to meet the market where you find it, and where we found it. The sweet spot for us back when we got going was to have every category of food, but as natural and as healthy as we could find within that category. And that strategy worked.
And no one else was doing that.
Very few other people were doing it. And there were other small natural food stores, but nobody was, only a couple of other natural food supermarkets existed in the United States at that time. I can think of really three. There was Fraser Farms in San Diego, Mrs. Gooch's in LA, and Bread and Circus in Boston. And they'd only opened up a natural food supermarket a year or so before we did. So, but
Amazing.
they were an early inspiration to us.
And just a parenthetical thought here on reading this Fragile Family study about all the things that go wrong with like poor neighborhoods and people that have crappy public schools and broken homes and all that. One of the many features is what they call it, a food desert. There's just no good stores within like 50 miles of some of these neighborhoods. I trust that was a problem everywhere when you started. Food deserts.
They weren't taken from that perspective. Pretty much everybody was living in a food desert because the food that were being eaten back then, besides people eating a lot of meat, was a lot of processed foods. I mean, this was also a time we take for granted. I remember the first time when we were kids, Michael, when you could remember Anita Bryant singing about you could get orange juice from Florida. You could get it year round. And because it used to be you couldn't get oranges. I mean, we didn't have a national, let alone an international food system. So it was a local agricultural system, and you got what was in season. And it was usually, unless you lived in California or a place that really had a lot of great growing seasons, your produce was pretty stark. So we grew up, and my parents ate a lot of canned vegetables, canned fruits. You get canned peaches for dessert, or you'd get so they were living in a canned frozen food universe. That's the foods they ate, and they didn't taste good. Who the heck liked to eat vegetables that were out of cans? They didn't taste good, and so most kids develop a total disdain for vegetables because they never had any fresh ones that tasted good.
Yeah.
So the food system was very, very different 50 years ago. Today people take it for granted because it's evolved so much, and part of the reason it's evolved as it has is because of Whole Foods Market. We really did a lot to change the way people eat today.
Yeah, I like this one passage from the book here about trying to, in the early days, trying to fill your shelves with quality food, and it was hard. So you used 5-gallon jugs of water to fill up the space on the shelves when you didn't have the good stuff here. Anyway, then you talk about this supplier you had named Barbara, who baked muffins and cookies and bread. Each item was carefully wrapped in saran wrap and hand-labeled. Customers would wait in line on Tuesdays and Thursdays when her deliveries came. We felt like she was the best-kept secret in Austin. Then one day, Mary, a new team member who had previously worked in the hotel food service, took a bite of one of Barbara's blueberry muffins. "This is a Sara Lee muffin," she declared. "Oh, no," said the folks in the bakery department. "Barbara baked these herself." Mary was unconvinced and went out and bought a box of Sara Lee muffins. We all gathered around for a taste test, and she was right. They were identical. The next day, we paid an unannounced visit to Barbara's bakery, where, sure enough, we found a pile of empty Sara Lee boxes. That's hilarious.
Well, there's always cheaters.
I know, but that does bring up, how do you know that the quality of the food that you're getting from vendors or distributors or whatever your sources are for these are really high quality.
I mean, in the early days, it would be difficult. We wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, there are other stories that didn't quite make the book. I'll just tell you one, for example. A lot of the organic produce we got in the early days was coming from California. And one of our probably our biggest supplier for a couple of years was a company named Sunburst Farms. And it was kind of a hippie commune. And so they were doing their own organic agriculture on this commune. And it was very romantic. And we got truckloads of their produce every week. And then one day it just stopped. And so we investigated what happened. And because you didn't get an answer, they just got to close down. And then what had happened was that the feds raided Sunburst Farms because not only were they a organic hippie commune selling organic produce, they also were like a survivalist gun cult.
Oh no.
And, and, and the FBI raided them and shut them down. So, of course, we didn't know that about them, right? So in the early days, so much was done on trust. And of course, all business ultimately comes down to a lot of trust. But as time passed, Whole Foods got a lot more sophisticated in our ability um, to be able to verify things. It was very important when they passed. First, it was state certification systems for like organic produce. And then eventually it became a national standard. I mean, California was one of the first states to have Oregon and California were kind of the front runners. But other states started to do it too. I remember when Texas did it, it was a big deal. And that gave some comfort that what we were getting was really because it was authenticated. And then when they had the federal national system, there was more trust built into the system because they had inspectors and you had to pass inspections and whatnot. And we made a big deal on our meat and our animal welfare, our seafood. We went to great lengths to get what we call third-party certification, where you'd have a third-party independent certifying agency that would go in and check claims and that would therefore they would authenticate. Like take something like fair trade. It's like, well, we can't go inspect all these farms everywhere in the world about fair trade, but there's fair trade organizations that do that and they authenticate it. It's their brand, their reputation that's on the line. So ultimately what happens, as you will appreciate, capitalism, if there's a market demand for something, consumers are not sure this stuff's what it says it is, then you'll have innovations that occur. You'll have certifying agencies to authenticate claims. And that's exactly what happened, and that the system gets more complex as you enter into new types of suppliers. One new type of supplier is certifying or authenticating label claims.
And that's a good, I guess, free market solution to a problem of quality control. But don't we still need a state or federal control agency like that actually checks the quality of food and drugs?
I don't know if we absolutely need it, but I think that it creates a higher degree of trust generally if we do have one. But it's always a matter of degree, right? And can you be sure the feds are doing their job? I mean,
Well,
there's
no.
lots of failures, so you can't always trust that. And then you run the risk, the next step of getting over-regulated, and then you get potentially regulatory capture, right? Like we have that regulatory capture. You might
The
argue the
pharmaceutical industry.
industry has captured the FDA.
Yeah.
Um, and the Cattlemen's Association and the meat producers have captured the Department of Agriculture. You could argue that. For example, one of the most interesting innovations that's occurred that I know from your moral arc that you will appreciate, um, uh, the animal suffering that occurs through the current lack of regulations that we have on animal welfare in the United States. So one of the free market solutions to that is cellular meats, where basically they can grow they can make them DNA identical, and then grow chicken meat or grow beef within a factory, so to speak. And Florida has just outlawed that, made
I
it.
know. I can't
Yeah.
believe it.
Well, I mean, that's the type of regulatory capture,
Yeah. That's
protecting
just
special interest.
right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And as RFKJ is always talking about, the pharmaceutical industry has captured the regulatory state and we're being poisoned. I don't know how far to take that, but there's some truth to that for sure. Yeah. Okay, just back to the kind of business end of things. You go from one store to the superstore to a couple stores in Austin and Texas. How do you go 540 stores nationwide? Did you bought up some other existing stores that were not quite as successful and then turned them into Whole Foods?
We did a combination of the two. For example, the first expansion out of Texas was when we went to Northern California. And I detail that in the book. That was what ultimately led Whole Foods to become a national company, was that breaking away from our home base and saying, let's do something crazy. Let's open something, 2,000, 3,000 miles away from where
The
we
People's
live.
Republic of Berkeley.
Yeah, and that was our second store, and we
That's
have
a great story.
it's got its own chapter because of the union attacks we got. But what we did also, we bought our sister companies. That we talk about the Natural Foods Network in the book, that there was an organization early on started in the really early 1980s, where we put the other the natural food supermarket chains like Whole Foods, Mrs. Gooch's, Bread and Circus, Whole Food Company in New Orleans, Nature's in Portland, Unicorn Village in Miami. There was a network of people that were operating stores like Whole Foods, and we started to meet and come together regularly. 3 times a year, we'd get together and we'd tour. One of those areas would host us, and we'd tour and we'd see their stores and we'd exchange financial information. None of us were competing with each other, so we were competing against the supermarkets, and so we were all helping each other to get better. That created us friends. I became good friends with all of the other companies that were like Whole Foods. But Whole Foods got venture capital money first. Whole Foods did an IPO first. Whole Foods had its own currency. And so increasingly, those entrepreneurs who weren't really wanting to build an empire or build a great big business as I wanted to do, they sold out to us. And so it was a win-win deal. They became fabulously wealthy, and they're set for life. And we got a new regional platform to grow from. We got territory and talent, and that enabled us. Once we were in LA, then when we bought Mrs. Gooch's, they had 7 stores. I think Southern California now has got like 80 or 90 stores. And when we went to Boston and bought Bread and Circus, they had 5 or 6 stores. And now in that New England region, we've got, I don't know, 50 or 60 stores. And from there, it's not hard to go down to New York and Philadelphia. They're all in that kind of corridor up there. So that ended up giving us also intellectual capital came in, people that really knew the business. You have to always think about what are your limiting factors for growth. It's like any ecosystem, there's limiting factors for growth. Maybe there's not enough, if you're an ecosystem, maybe there's not enough water, maybe there's not enough nutrients, maybe there's, it's hard to say what the limitations can be on any kind of ecosystem. Well, in a business ecosystem, you could have limitations. We don't have enough capital. How can we grow? We don't have the money to grow. So capital can be a constraint, or we don't have the talent to grow. Who's going to run it? We don't have enough skilled leaders or managers to be able to execute at a high level. Or it could be we don't have locations. It's hard to find good locations. It might take years to find a good location. I talk about in the book how when we decided to go to the Bay Area, we wanted to go to San Francisco. We just couldn't find a location. So we went to Palo Alto first because that's where we first found a good location. And then Berkeley was next, and then Mill Valley. And then we finally got to San Francisco 6 years after we'd opened up the first one in Palo Alto. So that's we grew partly by acquisition of strategic stores that really helped us create a platform for us to expand quicker. And then also mostly from organic growth. Most of the stores we opened ourselves. I mean, we have 540 stores. Maybe of the ones that we acquired that are still actually in the same locations, because we did relocate most of them eventually because they were too small. Maybe 20 of those, 25 of those were stores that we bought and are still operating. So mostly stores we opened.
And those are all company owned. There's no franchising, right?
No franchises, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned unions. What's wrong with unions? Isn't that a bottom up market solution to a
It
problem
is.
with labor and management?
There's nothing wrong with unions. I'm not anti-union. Unions have served a valuable historical place in America when workers were being exploited or taken advantage of. The unions helped organize them, countervailing force to capital. You have to remember that in the day of the 19th century, when we had the industrialization of America, workers were not, they were just seen as pretty much expendable, and they were just seen as another factor in production. And the management and the owners didn't really necessarily care about them. And so unions kind of came about as a way to bad treatment. If you study the history of it, oftentimes we had very horrible working conditions. Now you can say they, voluntary exchange. They didn't have to work there, but that doesn't mean they weren't being treated poorly. And it doesn't. I've never thought of myself as anti-union, but one thing we have in the United States is we also have unions that are now a type of monopoly. They don't allow a certain type of union to compete against those unions. They've made, this is regulatory capture. They've made company unions illegal. Company unions, for example, in Japan, is a typical way things are organized. A company union would be one that the company creates. It could still go on strike, but you'd have a union that management also belonged to. And the whole idea of a company union is, hey, we're all in this together. Let's figure out how to make the workplace a better place to work by having constructive dialogue about it. We can all vote on these things collectively. That type of union is illegal in the United States. People don't really know that. It's not taught in the history books, but it's legal in much of the rest of the world, but it's not legal here. And as a result, the unions have to be third-party unions. The company can't have anything to do with them. The owners can't do anything about it. That means almost inherently they're adversarial, us versus them. So it's the management, the owners versus the workers. So you have this continuous adversarial clash. So where I've always stood on this was unions are like a competitor that business has for the hearts and minds of their workers. If you don't do a good job of taking care of your people, paying them well, helping make sure they're happy in the workplace, caring about their growth as potential growth as leaders and getting more skills, if you're not helping them become better, then they can always turn to a union. But they won't turn to that union generally unless they feel like they've been mistreated, because they're going to have to pay union dues. And so it's, to take a union on is expensive. And so that, because it's a middleman, right? The union's now going to represent you. You don't represent yourself. The union represents you. Well, you have to pay the union to represent you. So if you have a workplace where there's high degree of cooperation and people are working together, we just wanted Whole Foods to be what I call beyond unions, meaning that they could always choose a union, but they just would never want to. Because, I'm proud of our record. Whole Foods was one of the 100 best companies to work for 20 consecutive years. From the beginning of when they started rating companies until Amazon acquired us, and we were then no longer independent, so no longer eligible. So, so that's one of the things I really care about. But I'm not anti-union.
Yeah, I understand. That's your conscious capitalism stakeholders, which include not just the owners and stockholders of your company, but the employees and the neighborhood and
suppliers,
the customers, suppliers, everybody.
Yep.
Do you still have that, or does Amazon, now owning your stores, still have that 19 times limit from what the CEO can make versus the average worker? Wasn't it something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if we still have it. I doubt we do. That was that probably got repealed the day I retired.
That's really funny. And I guess you could say, well, that's the market speaking. If Disney wants to pay Bob Iger $500 million a year or whatever he makes, that's their business. He's going to make more money for them. But doesn't it seem kind of unseemly when, the average worker can barely support a family? something like that? Isn't there an intuitive, I don't know, just disconnect there?
I think that I think that's a complex question. There's a lot of different angles on it. Businesses do have to meet. They have competition for excellent leadership. It doesn't work for free, and excellent leaders can make the company a lot more money. So there is a market for excellent leaders, you might say, and they do switch teams frequently. They will go to other companies when they get really generous offers. So you don't want to lose your most talented people. So you have to meet the market sort of as you find it. On the other hand, the executives in the United States are paid far more than the executives in say Europe or Asia or Japan, much higher percentages of the overall profitability of the company. So that's kind of an American thing. I mean, you could make an argument that we talked a lot about regulatory capture. There can also be board capture in a way where you have a cozy thing between the management and the boards where the management blesses the board's compensation and the board blesses the management's compensation. So that's one reason shareholder activists sometimes that's one that can be a hot button for shareholder activists if management's compensation gets too high. But that being said, I fundamentally believe that the only reason I set limits at Whole Foods was simply because we had a more egalitarian, we're all in this together, shared fate kind of philosophy, and and people were still making a lot of money. It's just they just couldn't become mega wealthy by being a leader at Whole Foods. They could become extremely well paid, but not necessarily. I mean, there's a lawsuit going. Elon Musk is getting sued for some kind of $500 million deal he made with Tesla's board. I mean, there are certain at a certain point people do become offended, and it can be bad public relations.
Okay, what about employee-owned stores? What is your opinion on that?
You mean like
Just as efficiency compared to the way most companies are set up.
it's an interesting question, and it leads me into sort of a more philosophical.
Yeah,
So you got to hang with me on this one.
yeah.
So let's say that because I started out in the co-op movement, I belonged to food co-ops, and they were consumer food co-ops. They were owned by the members, the people that bought the food, right? And that was food for people, not for profit. And I lived in a commune for a while, a housing co-op, and we kind of collectively owned the house that we were living in. So when I got a little more adept with stakeholder theory, I began to see the interdependencies these stakeholders have. That I remember I got invited to speak to the National Food Cooperative Movement. I forget what was the name of the organization, and I went in there and I've always had a little provocative air about me, and I said, it's good to be back with my fellow co-opers. He said, Whole Foods is a co-op. And they said, and that audience is stunned. And they says, you're not a co-op. You're, I said, no, we're an investors co-op. We're owned by our investors. You're owned by your consumers, by your members. There are supplier co-ops that are owned by the suppliers. And there's workers co-ops or worker businesses that are owned by the workers. Why is one type of ownership more ethical than another grouping? I said, in fact, Whole Foods is a public company, so we can be owned by our suppliers, our investors, our customers, and our team members. They can all have a stake in our business where you're just restricted to, so
Nice.
I never got invited back to speak because I was being the ultimate heretic. But what's interesting about an investors co-op compared to the other forms, investors have the fewest conflicts of interest. One of the challenges that I saw early on and when I was part of the food co-op movement was they're owned by their members. Like REI, for example, is owned by their members. And the thing about it is, what do the people that are the members want most from their food store? They don't care about profits. They want the prices to be as low as possible. And so the challenge for a food co-op is how do we retain capital? Because if the power is voted for by the members and they're the shoppers, they're just going to vote. We don't care if you open another store in another city. We don't care about that. What we just want is lower prices. Keep the prices low. We don't want you to accumulate any capital. And if you have a workers and they own it, what do they want? Do they care if you're going to accumulate capital to open some other store someplace? Maybe if they think they're going to get more jobs if they did that. But in general, they just want the pay to be as high as possible. So, and suppliers can have the same conflicts. The investors co-op, the publicly owned company or the one or a privately owned company by the owners, they have the fewest conflicts of interest. They know they want to make as much money as possible. And they also know that in order to do that, they have to pay well. They have to have good prices. They have to sort of, this is the argument whenever I'm trying to get into a debate with people that are arguing for shareholder capitalism, see clearly, which is the shareholder capitalist model has fewest conflicts of interest, and your whole stakeholder thing confuses people. And it's like you could be a own a membership co-op like REI, and you could figure out ways to innovate around that limitation that I was discussing. There's not none of these are inherently better or superior, provided there's that each of these stakeholders has a way uh, to to vote with their feet to exit the relationship, and if they find a way to retain capital so that the business is able to grow. Shareholder capitalism, as it's usually understood, has the fewest conflicts of interest, but that doesn't make the stakeholder model invalid. It's just you have to make sure that the stakeholder capitalism doesn't take over and control all capital allocation, and so it stops being invested and saved, and the investors get screwed. Is this making sense?
After the meltdown of 2008, 2009, my sense was that you really have to have a firm hand on the steering wheel that the government does, because the investors, the Wall Street people, the traders, whoever, they're like athletes in a sport. They'll do whatever they have to do to win. So you really need referees. You need rules about doping and so on. This is about the time when the whole doping scandal came out in cycling. I thought, yeah, of course they're all doping because they feel they have to, even if none of them really want to. The system is kind of set up that way. And that was my analogy for free market capitalism. You really need to have some regulation by the government, top down, or else, they'll cheat the system if they can.
Or, I mean, you'll have the mafia. I mean, I remember
Yeah. Yeah.
one debate I did in Freedom Fest against Kevin O'Leary was about you know conscious capitalism, and O'Leary's point of view is business is like a war, and it's like I want my entrepreneurs. I don't want them taking any prisoners. I just want them to go out and destroy the the competitors. And I say, no, you don't. That's not true. You urge your entrepreneurs to go murder and kill. So you think there should be some rules. They shouldn't be allowed to murder their competitors to eliminate them as competitors, right? So if you don't have any rule of law or no limitations, there has to be rules of the game, or you end up in sort of the mafia type in a state where you'll just do anything to win and take out a competitor. And so yeah, I mean, anarchy ends up, and you get into anarcho-capitalism, you get into all kinds of intellectual problems, I think, that are not, I don't think, solved. You can talk about you have your own defense system. And it's like, yes, that's what the mafia has. They have their own defense system, and it's called hitmen. And
You're paying for it one way or the other.
so it's just a question. I mean, we saw that happen when the Soviet Union broke down, right? And they ended up not having a good rule of law in place. So you had oligarchies. They just sort of took all the state assets and just redistribute them to their buddies, and then you had now you got back to a dictator again. So the good society has to have free markets, needs to have free trade, innovations, and things like that. But it needs the rule of law. It needs regulations, or we're going to end up we're
Yeah.
not going to like where we end up.
Yeah. And Naomi Oreskes on the show talking about her book, The Big Myth. The big myth is that the free market can solve all problems. Her point was that some collective action problems can't be solved by the market. So her examples were the electrification of rural America in the 1930s. No private electric company wanted to run a line down some dirt road in the deep south to one farm down there. So Roosevelt administration said, well, we want everybody in America to have electricity. We will subsidize you to run the line down that road. Isn't that an example? Or, the interstate highway?
No, those are bad examples. And the reason why is, look what Rockefeller did with the oil industry. And I mean, he took it everywhere, where at one point he had 90% of the refining capacity in the United States at the lowest possible prices. And of course, that was eventually broken up by the government because, he was seen as a monopolist and had some shady business practices that would now be illegal, but were legal back then. I don't see why electrification would have been any different if you'd let the free market do its thing. And you're saying if it didn't pay, then then perhaps in some examples, perhaps government could step in. But in general, you could make, where does the government stop? I think the way I would explain this, because I get asked this kind of question all the time, and I say, look, there's three basic organs to solve problems in a complex society like the United States. First, there's the free market. Whatever the free market can solve, whatever corporations can solve, whatever the problems are, they should do it, because they're going to do it with more innovation and more efficiency than anybody else. That's just been proven. You just can't really argue about that, in my opinion, because socialism's failed miserably when the government tries to do everything. And then the second thing, and then there are going to be other problems that are best solved by we'll call it the philanthropic sector, or the NGOs, or the not-for-profit sector. For example, let's take animal welfare. That's not going to be a way you can make profit on that, probably. So if you can't make a profit at it, it probably doesn't belong in the private sector. That's where something like the Humane Society of the United States comes in handy. And there are all kinds of nonprofits that are set up to kind of solve problems that the for-profit sector can't handle. And then we have government, because there are problems that neither the free market sector nor the philanthropic sector can solve. The bigger environmental issues, cooperation, for example, international cooperation, for example, on maybe the oceans. There are bigger commons that we can't tackle, and I think government has legitimate roles to play there. So the problem is that's kind of a hierarchy, and I'm assuming the default is in the private sector, and until the government should stay out of that. It's not their domain.
Where would you put roads, the interstate highway and roads, that your customers get to drive to your stores for free on public roads?
Roads is an interesting thing. And of course, increasingly, what you have there is generally government-private cooperation. The government funds and the private sector bids it out, and then builds it, right? But increasingly, you're seeing a lot more toll roads being implemented, because then it's user pays. For example, I drive a Tesla, so I'm not paying gas taxes, so I'm not really actually paying my fair share, so to speak, of the gas cost. Some of the gas taxes go to maintain roads, for example. So there needs to be new solutions to that. But anytime I'm on a toll road, I am paying my fair share.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and then the internet. This was a DARPA initiated project, initially a government program that we all benefit from now. Isn't that a final example?
I think we can say that the internet sort of originated with the government setting up certain networks that were piggybacked on. But the real growth came when the World Wide Web was sort of created and innovated. And that was largely done by private. So it's and
It's
oftentimes
always
it's
a
not.
mix. Yeah.
It's a mix.
Yeah.
It's not an either or situation. Uh, so hey, sometimes I'm not anti. It's like I'm not anti-union. I'm not anti-government.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right now, government in all levels in the United States is spending. If you take local, if you go back to 1900, the governments at all levels, local, state, and federal governments took about 6% of the GDP of the country. Now they spend about 40% of the GDP, and they want to keep spending more. So for me,
Both
the
parties.
and they keep regulations that we don't have a good way to sunset regulations. We just add new regulations on every year. It gets more and more complex. It gets harder and harder to do business. A state like California becomes increasingly difficult to do business in. And so if the government won't enforce property rights and won't protect people from shoplifting and theft, your government's failing in its primary duty, which is to protect the lives and property of its citizens. That's its main job.
What's it like to have an IPO? Did you actually go to Wall Street and ding the bell and all that stuff?
I mean, I talk about how that was like for an entrepreneur, you can like you can only lose your virginity once. That first IPO is equivalent to that in a way. It was a it was a fun thing, and for me, it was really important because after 14 years of my investors having faith in me and never being able to sell any of their stock, they had to exit and an exit with a huge gain, right from what they'd initially invested in. So it took a big weight off my shoulders. Plus, the whole IPO was fun. No, I mean we went. We needed more money, and we faced a choice. We either had to go do another round of venture capital funding, which would have meant the original owners would have lost control of the business to the VCs, or we could do an IPO, which would cause the VCs to exit and we get them off our board. We thought that was the lesser of the two evils, and but it also created great liquidity for us, and we got new pools of capital that allowed us to accelerate our growth. We only had 12 stores when we went public, and that was 1992. So now we're 32 years later, and we have 540 or maybe 550 stores now since I've retired, and they keep opening them.
Okay, last question on your spirituality. What do you like about ultramarathon hiking and just being out in the middle of nowhere for days on end?
Um, there's a lot of things I like about it. The first is, of course, just the natural beauty. Um, Secondly, your fitness levels go up really a lot. If you're hiking 8, 10, 12 hours a day and you're able to do it for, 2 or 3 weeks or longer, your body just gets amazingly fit. Your vitality gets really high. You feel incredible. Probably like we felt when we were hunters and gatherers and we were wandering nomadic and wandering around all the time. It's probably our evolutionary heritage. And you get a little taste of that when you're out wandering around on a trail for mile after mile after mile, day after day. Feel really good. Nature's so beautiful. And the communion with nature is really special. I love nature. I love the beauty of it. And I think the third thing is uh, you don't really know this until you get out and do it, but when we live in a city life, we're kind of accelerated. We're sped up. We live at an accelerated pace that is probably alien to how our bodies evolved. When you get on you're backpacking like that and you're out there hiking slowly, 10 or 12 hours a day, you start to slow down to nature's rhythm. The sun is this thing that, it comes up at sunrise, you kind of wake up and then you start hiking and then you keep hiking. It goes over the arc of the day until it's almost sunset and you make camp and then it's dark and you go to sleep. There's a rhythm to that. It's a very slow rhythm compared to how we experience life in an urban environment where it's all very accelerated. I like that. I like slowing down like that. I like the acceleration too. I prefer living in a city. I don't think I'd be
Yeah.
very happy living in just on a,
Good way to recharge your batteries. All right, John, there it is. The whole story. Get it. It's a great read. Very much appreciate it. Usually I ask my guests what's next for them. What's next for you is love.life. Give us a little plug about that and where people can find you on
well,
that.
we call it Love Life
Oh,
and
love life. Okay.
say love.life because that's our URL as well. www.love.life, not love.life.com. There's no .com, just love.life, but it's pronounced love life. And it's to make it. We've got we're already in business. We've got a telehealth business. We're licensed to practice medicine in all 50 states. We've got a online coaching business. If you go to the website, you can see these. We've got online coaching business for diabetes and for weight loss. And we are going to be opening up this fantastic location in Southern California, in El Segundo, in the Beach Cities area, located right next to one of Whole Foods Market's most successful stores in Southern California. I have the advantage of knowing where all Whole Foods Market's best stores are, and those are good places for us to open up.
Nice.
So we're taking over an old Best Buy. So it's big. It's 45,000 square feet. We're going to have a healthy restaurant. We're going to have a state-of-the-art fitness center. We're going to have a yoga studio, Pilates. We're going to have a spa. So massage, facials, all the different things you do at a spa. We'll have recovery modalities from cold plunges, infrared saunas, hyperbaric oxygen chamber, cryotherapy. We're going to have play. We're going to have 3 pickleball courts. But most importantly, we're going to have a medical center. And this is unlike any medical center that I'm actually aware of, because while we were going to have doctors, these are going to be functional integrative doctors. And we're going to want ideally our members to do a battery of test assessments where we can find out exactly what level of health they're at. We're all on a health journey. Once we know what your baseline is, our doctors and our wellness coaches can begin to create an individualized precision plan for you to become the healthiest version of yourself. Most people go to a doctor only when they get sick. Our vision is to have doctors work with you and monitoring you so you don't get sick. So the diseases that kill us, heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, these are, people don't want to admit it, but these are primarily dietary lifestyle diseases. And genetics play a part, but again, the diet and lifestyle that we live they fire the gun that the genetics load. Anyway, it's consistent with my own higher purpose in life. I want to help people to become the healthiest. A question I like to ask people, Michael, I'll ask you this question. Would you like to live to be 100?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm healthy.
Exactly. most people ask that question say no. But I said, what if you could live to be 100 and be just as healthy as you are right now and have clear, sharp mind and you have the same vitality? Would you want that? Well, duh, of course I would.
Yeah, right.
That's what Love Life's trying to do.
Nice. Unbelievable. Wow. You're 70 years old and you're just starting off on a new project. Amazing. So
hey, in the book, Michael, I'll leave the listener with this final thought. So the first chapter in the book is what I call the game of life. And the last chapter in the book is called the infinite game. An infinite game is a game like basketball or soccer. These are finite games. They have a beginning, they have an ending, they have a set of rules, and the players that play it, and they find a winner and they find a loser. In an infinite game, the game just goes on. So life is an infinite game, at least until we have supernova here on the planet. And even then, DNA may have gotten off somewhere else. It may be replicating somewhere else. I would say the universe itself is kind of an infinite game, at least until it comes back into singularity.
Yeah.
Well, Love Life's an infinite game. I'm creating a business that I hope is going to outlive me, and that'll be doing amazing things long after I've passed on to whatever the next reality is.
Till we see each other in the next life.
Well, the next dream, exactly.
All right, John, thanks so much. That was great. You're a true inspiration. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.